Welcome to the Syllable Summer Conference 2012. We've already done a part with a recording in Dutch. And now I have a few more topics that we'll do in English for the international audience. What I've got loaded up on our laptop here is Jazz 04. And that's a new developer edition of Syllable Desktop. It was made by Chris Robinson, also known on the Syllable forum as NOS. And he took the new Syllable 067 release, which is also a topic of this conference because it's new from the past half year. But beside this new Syllable Desktop release, Chris Robinson extended it into a developer edition, like we had way back in the past. It's an 067 installation CD with as extras all the developer packs and a number of separate packages and some source code and instructions for compiling it from the Syllable software site from Syllable user Bogomips, as he calls himself on our forum. So this is really a much bigger CD than the regular Syllable releases. And I haven't actually tried it yet. I looked at it and it looks nice. But now we're going to try to install it. So we will at once have a movie about installing the new Syllable 067 and the new Jazz 04 Developer Edition. And we hope it's going to work. I have to think about, this particular laptop needs a hardware troubleshooting option to start. This machine does not support ACPI in Syllable Desktop, so instead of the regular installation option, I have to find the option that disables ACPI. And that's not in the front menu, so I have to go into the Save Modes menu. I get an extra drop menu on the installation CD, and there's the no ACPI option. And this should work on this particular laptop. Okay, this is the installation start screen on the new Syllable 067. It's not much changed from the previous ones, except that the nice blue window decorator is now the default on the installer and on the installed system. So I just start the installation by pressing I. This will automatically give us a recording of the installation process. This is just some documentary text. You just have to read it, and it's shown in a text mode pager. So you can just press the space bar to continue to the next screen. Do we need to create a partition? No, because this machine is already installed. But I can show what happens when you do need to create a new partition. Yes is the default choice. It's capitalized Y. So if I press enter, I get the default option. And then it starts the Syllable disk editor. and it shows the installation CD that we're starting from and the hard disk, which is, according to the manufacturer, 60 gigabytes, but in traditional gigabytes that means about 55. So if I would look what's already on this disk, you see that it's already partitioned. There are a number of Linux systems installed on it, including our own Syllable server, twice actually, and a Linux swap partition to go with it. So I have to look into the extended partition to see where we can put Syllable. You see that here, partition which is numbered 6 by Syllable is the partition that already is prepared to take a Syllable installation. It's in Syllable AFS format. And the last partition is a Windows FAT partition for data exchange between Syllable and the Linux systems on this laptop. So the partition is already there, but we check here that it's numbered 6 by Syllable. The Syllable starts from 0 like grub, so it's consistent with its own bootloader. But Linux starts numbering from 1. So in Linux this is partition 7 instead of 6. But as long as we're only installing Syllable, that's of no concern. I don't change anything here, so I do cancel and then quit, so no new partition table is written. And then again, explanation text. It's very important to read this to make sure you do it right, especially if you have data already on your disk that you want to keep, like the Linux installations in this case. Now we get the partition list again, but in the installer. And here we see what we have already checked in Disk Manager, that partition 6 is the Syllable AFS formatted partition. And there's a 6.5 gigabyte reserved for Syllable there. And you can see that when you do a normal Syllable desktop installation, you end up with a few hundred megabytes installed. We've done a little work on it already, and there's now 350 MB used. But this is the developer edition we're installing now, so it's going to take more space. But 6.5 gigabytes, that's about as much space as you need if you wanted to compile Syllable itself from scratch. So if you wanted to build a complete new Syllable version from the source code, then something like 7 gigabytes would be the minimum you would need. So that should be possible in this 6.5 gigabyte space. In the menu, partition 6 has a shortcut menu option F, so I can use that to select partition 6. And then it will confirm, because it's very important not to overwrite the wrong partition here. And then we see that we've selected the right partition, the AFS one. And to make sure, you have to type yes full out here, so that you don't make a mistake. So it immediately reformats the partition, because an older Syllable installation was already on there, taking 350 megabytes, and that has now been erased. You see that it's very fast, because it's a quick format which Syllable uses, and this is internally. The installer does not need to do this format itself. It's integrated in the system, and it's a quick install. It's very fast. So now it starts unpacking the Syllable base system. But as I said, in the developer edition, this base system is greatly extended, because most of the extra packages will be installed immediately, so they don't have to be installed separately. They're in this base package, so the base package is much bigger than usual. This normally takes maybe a minute, so I expect it to take a few minutes now. It needs to copy from the CD to the hard disk. And if you look quickly, you see that it's now unpacking source code in a folder called Browse Source Code, and that's because a checkout of the syllable source code repository, which is in a CVS repository on the internet. A checkout of a very recent syllable source code is also installed here, and that's what it's installing now. This is an old version of the GNU-C library, so there is some old code in there that is not relevant anymore, but it's still in the source repository in CVS for historical reference. So actually it could have been left out of this developer edition. This is a point where the developer edition could be shrinked a little. The purpose of the developer edition is that the purpose of a normal syllable distribution is that you get an installation for a regular user. And that's why we have left out a lot of things that software developers usually would want, because we don't want everyone to have to download that, because most people are just operating system users, and applications are more important to them than development tools. So a lot of development stuff is left out of a regular syllable installation. But the purpose of this developer edition is to include it. So almost everything in our extra software downloads that is meaningful to developers is included in here. And to play with, there are a number of games. You just saw some emulators scrolling by. And some games are included here with instructions on how to compile them from the source code. So when you install this, you should have not only a working Syllable 067 system, but also all the extra packages that give you a complete system that's ready to start software development. Now it's unpacking Builder, Syllable's custom build system, which you would usually use to compile software for Syllable, or to compile the system itself. You see it unpacking Python. Python is not Syllable's default programming language, so it is not in a default installation, but it is used for a lot of other packages, so it is in this developer edition. Here you see parts of the developer pack, the Developer's Delight collection pack. Boost, the C++ libraries. This is really an everything in the kitchen sink edition for developers. So if you do use this to develop software, then you should make sure that it does not only run on your developer edition, but if you publish it for others to use, you should make sure that it doesn't use anything extra that's only in the developer edition. You should make sure that it also runs on a standard Syllable installation. So if you use extra libraries, you should make sure that those are included in your distribution, or that you include instructions on how to download and install them as extra. It's processing the symlinks now. So we should be near the end. Every package in Syllable is in its own subdirectory. And because of that, you need to register the files by symlinking them in a symlink area, so that you get something resembling the traditional Unix file structure again. So instead of a bin directory that keeps all the executables, we have an index pool area full of symlinks, and those symlinks point to the programs folder in every package. So instead of the old Unix bin names, you get more user-friendly names. We call that programs now in Syllable, although about half of the packages in here are still according to the old naming, so we're in a migration period right now. But so that the system can still have a search path over all the packages, and the system can still have its bin directory. There is a programs directory with symlinks to all the program directories and all the packages directories. And that's what it's symlinking now at the end of unpacking this huge zip package with the entire base system. This is a number of times bigger than the normal Syllable installation. So this is a really heavy test of Syllable's reliability. In years past we've had bugs in the kernel and the file system that turned up when the installation became bigger. But Syllable itself is already bigger than it has ever been. And this is a number of times bigger even. I think this is about 4 times as big as a standard installation, and this is all in one zip file. So unpacking this in one go is a really heavy test of the kernel and the file system and the memory management. And so far so good. into the symlinks for the Developer's Delight pack, or actually the development files pack, the extra files that we extracted out of the system, which don't need to be in a default installation. And those are in a separate developers file pack, and they need to match the Syllable system version. And that's all already included here and already in installed form. So this is quite a bit more comfortable than installing those packages manually on a normal installation. Normally you install Syllable, and then for a complete developer system you have to install about 5 extra collection packs. One of them is the developer files pack. That's all included here. Still unpacking real stuff. So in a standard installation, all the symlinks are at the end of the zip file, but it seems like they're merged together now. So sometimes we get regular files and sometimes we get symlinks. These are symlinks again. So maybe we are near the end now, I don't know. This looks like the end. It's very important that you keep your patience during this process, because if you start hitting keys, the continuation of the installation may respond to it and be interrupted in a way that was not supposed to be. It's done unpacking the zip file now, but it's still syncing this data from the cache in memory to the disk. I hear it rattling. So that takes a while without visible output. You really have to be patient until the installer asks the next question. There it is. It's also very important to precisely follow the instructions. In the pager for the documentation earlier, you could use space to go to a next page, but here the installer asks specifically to use enter to continue, and you really have to do that, because if you use other keys, the installer may get confused. It's admittedly a bit primitive, but that's the way it is right now. So you really have to follow the instructions carefully. Now we have to tell the system how it should boot. And that's a grub bootloader menu configuration. And with L you can list it on the screen. And you see that it has adapted the menu to start from partition 6, where we told it to install. And there are a few options for installation that you usually don't need, but for special cases they're there in the installed boot menu. And you can see that it has added to every menu option the measure needed to disable ACPI, what we use to start the CD. And if you need that to start the installation CD, of course you also need it for the installed system. So the installer remembers that and installs that configuration to your installed system. And it has found the extra partitions, and it doesn't know if another system is installed on there, but in case it is, it allows you to start a system from those other partitions. And if you need to make changes to this, you can hit the E key, and then you get the file in an editor. And you can make modifications. And one thing I like to do, for example, is to set the delay to 5 seconds instead of 10. If you're not used to it, it's best to leave it at 10 seconds, but if you're used to the second boot menu, then you don't want to take it very long each time. So you can manipulate the delay time out for starting this menu. And as you can see, you get a graphical syllable editor program, just like the graphical disk manager earlier. So if you need to, you can modify the boot menu, but usually it's already okay. So I continue with enter again, exactly as it is instructed here. And there are a few extra packages on the CD, which are not in that large base package, and that's the Webster web browser and the Whisper mail program. And flashing by, you saw SIDE, which is our integrated development environment, which is extra on this developer edition. And now we're at the end of the installation, but now we have a very important step. You have to decide where the grub bootloader should go. And if you have a dedicated system for Syllable, maybe an old PC that you want to rescue that can run Syllable but not newer operating systems, you can install the grub bootloader at the start of the disk in the master boot record. But we have more systems on here, and those are started by Linux. So the master boot record is already occupied with the main bootloader and we don't want to overwrite it. And the main bootloader is already configured on this laptop to chain load to the Syllable bootloader. And that means that we should install Syllable's bootloader in its own partition where we just installed Syllable itself. So it's very important to get this right in order not to overwrite a bootloader if you already have one. So we want an extra bootloader for Syllable and we want it to go on its own partition. So I say P. And if you had hit enter too early, then you would have skipped this step automatically because you can do enter here to skip. And that would mean that you don't have a bootloader for Syllable. And that means that you have installed the entire system, but you can't start it because you haven't installed a bootloader. So this is a really essential step at the end. Now we could have a look around on the installation CD, but that's not very exciting. So we follow the instructions and we press B to boot the computer. If you hear snoring in the background, that's Bas. I'm going to tell him not to put his snoring on video. Gesnurk wordt opgenomen. Switch back to the beamer. I'm on the boot menu of the installation CD again. That's not what we want, so I take the CD out. Actually, if you get into this situation, the last option in the menu is to start from the hard disk. So if you accidentally start the Syllable CD again, you can use the last option to start from the hard disk anyway. I was too late. We're now starting in Syllable Server. So I have to let that continue for a while until it responds to Ctrl-Alt-Delete. Because as I said before, this machine has several systems installed and it has a Grub version 2 bootloader actually. And that starts automatically in Syllable Server, so I have to interrupt it quickly enough to choose another option. This is the Syllable Server login prompt, so I do Ctrl-Alt-Delete to reboot it. Okay, I have the Grub 2 menu now, but it's not on the beamer. Now it's on the beamer again. So this is the default option that was just starting, Syllable Workstation, which is actually a version of Syllable Server. We also have Linux Mint on this machine as a reference system for a complete Linux. And then Syllable Server and our graphical version of it, Syllable Workstation. And here's Syllable Desktop, which I've just replaced with the Developer Edition. So this is the main grub 2 menu. And this is the Syllable Desktop that we just installed. And it's already through the grub 1 bootloader because the Beamer didn't pick it up fast enough. So we're already in Syllable. The privileged user is the root user, the system administrator, and the password for now is also root. So we're already logged in. And this is Syllable 067, but it's also the Developer Edition. Starts very quickly, just like the regular Syllable. This machine has 2 gigabytes of memory. But Syllable has a limit of 1.5 gigabytes, so the memory is limited at 1.5 gigabytes. But at the moment it uses very little of that, typically around 30 megabytes after startup. You can see that better in the graph. The total height of the graph is the 1.5 gigabytes. And the black part is what it really uses at the moment. And the blue part is what it uses for cache, so that's not really necessary. And the cache part is about 40 megabytes, so the black part is something like 60 megabytes. So it uses a little more memory than usual because it has 1.5 gigabyte in total. And on a machine with less memory it would use even less for itself to start out with. Let's minimize that window. Well, here we're in an installation of the new Syllable 067. There's a reworked welcome file. It starts in our own web browser, Webster, that you just saw being installed as a separate package. It's a nicer layout now, the welcome file with a table of contents, clickable with some new sections. The default screen resolution is better. It's now 800 by 600. It used to be 640 by 480, which is still available. But 800 by 600 is more workable right from the start without having to change it. And 800 by 600 is also available on all machines, so it's still compatible with all machines basically. And also, as this table says, the system is now configured with different resolutions under different function keys. Syllable has multiple desktops, and each desktop can have a different resolution and color depth. So if I do Alt F2, I go to the second desktop, and the Beamer has to switch because it has its own resolution. So this is how it used to be, the default resolution, a bit small. Alt F3, same resolution, different color depth or different frequency maybe, but that doesn't make a difference on a laptop, so that's for old CRT screens. This is a higher resolution under Alt F4. And you see that the browser screen is not on here, because this is really a different desktop where you can do different work in. So if I switch back to the first desktop with Alt F1, the beamer has to switch again, and then I'm back in my welcome document in the browser. Browser is still based on WebKit, so it's pretty fast and fairly capable. Doesn't use a lot of memory either. This is what it used extra while the browser was open. These are the hardware that is recognized. Hardware devices, USB 2 controller, the Intel video chip, the Intel audio chip, or at least Intel HDA standard, maybe not really the Intel brand, and the processor, which is an Intel Core 1.6 gigahertz on this laptop. The CD player, the hard disk, the mouse, the keyboard, all the USB hubs internally for the USB ports. This is the one 6.5 gigabyte partition again. And if you remember that the normal installation was 350 megabyte, this developer edition is already 1.2 gigabyte. So you really get a lot extra. Now let's have a look at some of those extras. On the new syllables, including the 066 Live CD, but also the new 067 installation, you get a number of extra icons on the desktop so that you can easily go to the first installation you have to do. The welcome document is of course important in several languages. To get sound working, you have to configure it first, so the media settings are available straight from the desktop. You have to set the default output, which you usually set to the media server. And for the default input, you can choose how you want to play CDs, as analog CDs or as digital CDs. And usually you set it to digital. The video output is already set automatically. I can do apply here to activate those choices. And here's the mixer under stream volumes, but that's also available from the desktop here under volume. And then to get sound, you usually have to raise some of these settings. Let's look in the applications. These are the usual applications from Syllable Desktop. Let's have a look at what's extra in the developer edition. There's SIDE, which you saw installed separately, and there are actually several programs in there. There's the main integrated development environment, where you can work with projects. And if I were to create a new project, you can choose several types. And for a regular graphical syllable application, you would choose a C++ GUI project. And if you want more help from SIDE, you can use it with the layout editor, which is a component of the of SIDE. Let's see what we have here. It pre-generates a number of files for us, which you need for a C++ Syllable GUI application. Here's the main C++ file for the main program. That's usually separated in a few more files. Let's see if I can open this. If I double click it, it opens in Sorcery, the developer's text editor. Also more or less a component of SIDE. So this is the basic stub code to start your own application, pre-generated for you. And there are these extra parts which are also quite small, and you can start filling them out with your own application. This one is a bit bigger. This is the basic setup for handling messages sent to your application. In C and C++, things are separated out in main program code and headers. So there are also a few headers pre-generated for the basic definitions for your program. The main application, the main window for your application, and here are basic definitions for Syllable's messaging system, which is pervasive in Syllable GUI applications. So you always program by sending messages back and forth to different parts of your application. And then here's a special construct, an interface file, which is an SIDE thing. And there's no special handler for it. That's because SIDE knows what to do with it. And then you have resources, a PNG image file for your main program icon. And you can say what libraries you need for your program. And for a GUI application, you're always going to need the main libsyllable syllable library. So that's already pre-configured. You can save the project and add to it. And then here are a few buttons for compiling it. This is for sweeping it clean. So it's going to clean your source code for the next compile run. And this should be compilation. See, it's compiling your C program. Takes a few seconds, and here you can really see that all the development stuff is pre-installed on the developer edition. For this you need the C compiler, and the C compiler needs the assembler, and those are all ported from the GNU project. It's all standard open source, exactly the same as on Linux. And SIDE is a native syllable application with a Syllable GUI that controls all these open source GNU parts for you to make it easier. And it's all working pre-installed on the developer edition, very nice. So you get all the parts for an application pre-generated just by creating a new project. And then you can build it with those few functions. The functions in this menu are the same as the buttons, but here you get the text, so the sweep button is make clean. And compiling goes through make, so GNU make is also installed. And GNU make controls GCC, and GCC controls the GNU assembler from binutils. And then the last button is to run the product. So this is the run button. And now you get the bare code that SIDE has generated for you. And because we chose a Syllable GUI project, we get a Syllable window, because that's what a graphical application is. And because we didn't fill in any extra code, we just get a blank window. So this is the functionality that was pre-generated for you. Just a resizable blank window. And if you fill in the code, you get content in your application. So this really gets you started very quickly. All pre-installed in the developer edition from Chris Robinson. Very nice. There are just a few extra functions in there. You can add files, you can add C++ files and header files, and you can add libraries that you need to compile into your program that you need to link to. And you can add resource files for images that you need, which will be linked into the ELF binary. So for most resources you still end up with a single executable file, because they're compiled in as ELF resource files into your one executable file. You can organize your project in groups, and there are a few preferences you can set. This is how the GNU compiler GCC is called, so you can add extra flags for your application if they need it. You can give your application a name instead of app. You can give your application a category, which is added to the application executable as a Syllable extended file attribute. And it's formatted as a standard MIME type. So you get a Syllable extended attribute added to your single executable. So it's still a single executable file, but the category is added to it as a MIME type, and that is used by the Syllable menu to show the applications that are available on your system in categories. So for example, in the internet category are the Webster browser and the Whisper email client, and that's because they have an extended attribute that gives a MIME type that says category sort. Or actually, sorry, this is not a MIME type. You can add MIME types, but that would say that it's an executable. And there's an extra type of extended attribute that's syllable specific, and that says category. So if the category is internet, then the menu shows it in the internet category. So you can set that here, and then SIDE will add that category into your executable. If you've the make file that SIDE generates can be exported, so you can still use what's generated here from the command line. So what you could do is set up a new program in SIDE so that you have a start, and then if you like to work in a terminal instead of in a graphical development environment, you can continue your work in a terminal because it's just files, standard regular files that are generated. And you can export the make file to make it complete. And then you have a project that you can continue working with from a terminal if you want to. Well, we already saw the sorcery code editor that's included in the SIDE pack. There's also the layout editor, which we chose in this project. And with the layout editor you can set up interface widgets in your application in a graphical way. There's always the root view of the program, and then you can add widgets, for example a button, and you can give it a title. We could add well, let's add a checkbox. And then you see the window separating in two parts because it's now occupied by two widgets instead of one. So now the upper one becomes more or less recognizable as a button that you can click. And the bottom one is a checkbox that you can click. And both of them have a label. Oh, I have to select the root node to add a tab view. I'm not sure where it went. It seems to be down here. Oh, I don't know where it went. Maybe it can't be in the root node. Maybe you need to add a frame first of something. Slider maybe. The slider does become visible. Oh, the tab view seems to be all the way down here. So it's a bit tricky, but you can set up the graphical layout of an application with this graphical tool here, which is part of SIDE. And then when you've set up your basic application, you can start filling in the C++ code as we saw earlier. And things may become too difficult to do in this graphical helper tools. And then you can continue working from a terminal and in a text editor of your choice. But it's nice that you can set up the gross structure of an application from here to get you started much quicker. There are a few extra tools. Syllable keeps settings in settings files. And those are binary files, so you can't edit them in a text editor. So here's an extra tool to view them. The system has an event system internally, and a number of event types are defined, and you can view those here. Events that are available in the system that an application can use, and the statistics about it in the currently running system. Catalog editor is for translating your applications. A catalog is a list of strings in your application that are up for translation. And each language gets its own catalog. So if you want to add a translation for a new language, you add a catalog, and then you get the English strings in the original application, and then you can translate them in this editor. And the projects that we could choose from are defined in templates in here. So the projects that you can create are actually defined in files here too. They're zipped, but you could unzip them here and change them and zip them back. And that way you can modify the templates or make your own template for your own type of applications. You can see that SIDE uses a few private libraries in the lib directory here. And you can see that it has an extra library lib code view. And that's the editor widget that the Sourcery code editor is based on. So CodeView is the library which implements a syllable widget, and Sourcery is an editor GUI around this editor widget, so that it becomes a complete code editor. And only Code Editor uses this library at the moment. So it's a private library, so it's not installed into the system, but privately into the SIDE folder. So the rest of the system has no knowledge of this private library. That's the concept of Syllable, to separate programs properly from each other, so that software management becomes very easy. You can just move these applications by dragging them to another place. The only thing is, as long as they're in the applications folder, then the menu will show them. So then you can start them not only from the filer here, but also from the menu, sorted by the category attributes that I talked about earlier. Well, there's an extra development folder. In 067 are already a few of these development parts, so a few things are double now. Because in 067 I already added a few parts from SIDE, and SIDE is installed in its entirety here. So here is another example of the isolation of applications. A few of them are duplicated in this SIDE folder. The event viewer and translation editor that I just showed, and Sourcery, the code editor. But it's no problem because they're in separate folders. So this is what you already get as extra in Syllable 067. And in this developer edition you get the entirety of SIDE and the layout editor, because these are tools that are not exclusively useful to developers. Because, for example, this translation editor that I already showed is not exclusive to developers, because anyone can translate an existing Syllable application. You can take the catalog of an existing application, and you can translate that and add it to the binary, and then you can add your own translation without having to compile the program. So it's not really a developer's tool. So this is already included as standard in Syllable 067. And actually I moved the name of the private libraries folder from lib to libraries to make it more readable and to make it consistent with the system, because the system already has a folder called system/libraries for system libraries which are known globally. So this private library folder is now called libraries instead of lib. So here's the CodeView library again, which is double in the SIDE installation now. But they don't disturb each other at all. Well, this is the extra in the developer edition concerning graphical applications. So that is mainly the rest of SIDE. But as we saw, SIDE uses a lot of terminal console applications from standard open source. The GNU compiler and GNU make and the GNU assembler and other binary tools. And those are installed in resource packages, which are third-party ported packages. And those are not in the applications folder, but in the resources folder. And we call them resource packages as opposed to application packages. They're here. So all the stuff that you saw SIDE controlling from a graphical application is actually installed here in resource packages. Here's GCC, the GNU compiler. It's a big package. Here's binutils, which is actually double because the names are also being shifted, and a small part of binutils was already included in the base system, namely only the object copy utility, because the base system needs that. But now the complete binutils is installed, which includes really a lot more. Here's object copy again, but also all the assemblers and assembler disassembly tools and everything which is needed by GCC. And the GNU make utility, which is always used for compilation, is here. GNU make. And here's the Syllable's own builder tool, which can be used to automate the system build and the build of resource packages and everything really. So you have several options. If you can start an application graphically in SIDE, it will generate a number of files for you. And then if you want, you can continue development from the command line. And all these tools, all these resource packages are available from the command line. And they're not necessarily third-party tools, because Builder is a native Syllable tool, which I wrote specifically for Syllable over the past 10 years. And this is a command line tool. So to work with Builder, you just go into a terminal and give commands from the command line. And Builder also controls GCC and make and binutils similar to SIDE. So there are different levels at which you can work with the same project. You're not tied to any way of working. But these are all tools that help you. Well, there's a lot more installed. Most of the extras in the developer edition are in here. So these were the most important ones, but if you look through this, there are really a lot more. All the collection packs are installed in here. A lot of libraries, XML library, picture libraries, PNG, movie MPEG library here, JPEG, ID3 tags for tags in MP3 songs. Another assembler here, NASM, which is popular. PD curses, a nice tool. An XML parser which is written in Perl, so Perl is also installed and Python is installed, which you don't get in the default installation. Extra libraries for SDL graphics here. A lot of stuff really that you usually need for development. And then there is example stuff installed in the home directory probably. Here's the project generated by SIDE, I think. We didn't give it a new name, so it's called new project still. And here are the files that SIDE generated for us with an SIDE specific project file and the standard headers and C++ files. And because we already compiled it, there are object files from the compilation. And the binary is called app because we didn't change the name. So this is again the test application that we saw. You can simply start it from anywhere. You can click on it in the filer instead of from doing run from SIDE. And you can move it into applications if your application is done. and then it will also appear in the menu. We have a fairly large other category here, because things without a category attribute also end up here. So if I move our app to the applications, it should appear in the menu. Now we're hitting a syllable bug. You see, it should have moved it to applications, and it has in the background. But there's a bug that it doesn't refresh the filer window. And probably the same thing affects the menu, because the menu isn't regenerated now. So if I log out and log back in, we reinitialize the desktop. Oh, it's really very confused. So here we're hitting one of the current syllable bugs. So I'll restart. It's already starting, but the beamer takes a while. There we go. Now it's got its desktop icons back. We see the video card being confused here. It sometimes does that on this beamer. But the menu is back. And now our app should be, and now our app is here in the other category, sorted alphabetically on top. So there's our own compiled app again. The menu is a bit confusing now, so I'll restart it once more to see if I can get the video right again. That looks better. Ah, there it is. So the filer can get confused sometimes, and because the desktop and the menu are based on the same widgets as the filer, the menu can also get confused. So this was a restart, which is not a really big deal in Syllable because it's very fast. Extra stuff on the developer edition. Let's see if we have extra documentation. Not really as standard, I think. No, there are no extra manual pages as standard. So all the other extra stuff is in the home directory, I think. This was the stuff generated by SIDE. This folder is extra. This is documentation from our website, compiled by Chris Robinson. Here's the recent source code from the CVS repository. And all these make files on the README, they're really outdated. They have been outdated for 8 years or so. So that's something not to look at very much. But for example, if you go to the kernel here, then if you go into the kernel directory, then the make file here, for example, is still valid. If I attach a MIME type to this file, if I tell it that it's text, then I can click on the make file to open it. And you see that most text files open in the code editor now in Sorcery. And this is the make file for the kernel. So the latest syllable source code is on here. These are the tutorials from the website, I think. Yeah, from development.syllable.org. Let's see if we probably have, yeah, here's the main table of contents. So we can start that locally in the browser. This is the same documentation as on the website. The welcome document that we already saw, which is also on the desktop. Well, the installation, you already did that. We already did that, but you should have read this before installation, but this is on the website, so you can read this before installing. The frequently asked questions, also in an overhauled, cleaner format with clickable table of contents. Separate frequently asked questions for developers. So here we start the developer documentation and then the tutorials from the development website. So you can read all this on the website, but if you don't have an internet connection in Syllable and you're doing some programming, you can now read this without a network connection on your local Syllable installation. With the introduction tutorial about SIDE and other editors you can use, the debugger, how you can do tracing in Syllable with the native strace tool, how you can use Builder, and very advanced documentation if you want to port or write device drivers. It's really very thorough documentation written over the years. How to program device drivers, usually in C for Syllable. Kernel drivers or Syllable App Server video drivers in C++. Video drivers. Network drivers. It's all documented. So if you are missing some hardware support and you're able to port a Linux driver, please do. Here, this walks you to the porting process of a network driver. And half of that would be very similar to porting other types of drivers. This is a bit garbled. This is the Syllable. This is the Builder manual, and the line endings are garbled. This is better to read in a text editor instead of in the browser, where you can read it on the web. So a lot of documentation is included here. And example software is in here, which you can try to compile. The instructions are in here. And these constructions are all made by Bogo Mips from his Syllable Software website. Here's the web link. Well, it has a number of categories for paint programs. And here's the source code to GraphX2 and the instructions for compiling it. Those are all ported software from third-party projects. So they're not standardized as Syllable applications, so all of them have slightly specific compilation instructions to get them to work on Syllable. A lot of games are in here, really lots of categories. First-person shooter, Hexen. Really, Bogo Mips did a lot of work in the past year, porting a lot of SDL programs and some other programs and a number of libraries. And all that work is compiled here on the developer edition CD. So this is a lot of work done by Bogo Mips and Chris Robinson. So really thanks for that. And that all comes together in this developer edition CD, which can currently be downloaded from the Syllable forum. And after this conference, I'll make an official announcement, and I'll put up more download links on our developer site and such, so that it can be found easier. I think that's most of the extra content. Remember, this is the first time that I install this developer edition. So all the extras are new for me too, and it really went very smoothly. The installation takes a lot longer than normal because there's so much extra stuff in there, but it's really installed perfectly. It works immediately, and you immediately have a complete developer setup with the native Syllable tools in a perfect combination with all the ported GNU open source tools. And the installation was really very, very smooth, and it works. It just works right away, and it gives you a lot of power without manually installing extra packages, and it immediately gives you a full Syllable 067 system with all the extras to start developing your own programs or modifying existing programs straight away. So this is really very nice work from Chris Robinson and Bogo Mips. So congratulations on that, and thanks. And this concludes our presentation of the new developer edition, and actually also the new Syllable 067 that it's based on. So that's the end of this movie. Thank you.